Sure. I was in the courtroom today, in the overfill room, during the hearing. So what happened was we had this ruling in March that in a lot of ways was a very abysmal ruling. It denied many of Julian Assange's potential grounds for appeal and granted three extremely narrow grounds for appeal. One was over the assurances of the death penalty. One was over whether or not his free expression rights under the European Human Rights Convention would be violated if he was not allowed to rely on the First Amendment. In the same ruling, though, they stated that prosecuting him for revealing war crimes would not be a free expression problem, and that they made these bizarre statements that only three of the charges had anything to do with the First Amendment, the rest were ordinary crimes. And then they also discussed the issue of him facing unfair prejudice as a foreign due to his nationality. Both the nationality and the relying on the First Amendment comments come from comments made by Gordon Kronberg. Kronberg is the prosecutor in this case. He prosecuted Daniel Hale. He was involved, and I think the tail end of the Sami El-Arian prosecution. There was so many different phases to that persecution. I can't remember which ghoulish national security figure was in which phase. But a person with a really notorious history of anti-Muslim bigotry, of bringing in abusive prosecutions. And he told the court in a sworn declaration that the U.S. might argue that Julian Assange was not entitled to First Amendment rights as a foreign national, at least as it pertained to national defense information. Now, that means, the U.S. is saying, oh, we can prosecute him. Oh, we can prosecute him. We have this robust First Amendment. We can't rely on that. And it means you are treating him differently based on his nationality. So at the start of today's hearing, the defense acknowledged that they found the death penalty assurance sufficient. So that the death penalty issue is no longer in play. The Secretary of State had a lawyer present. The UK Secretary of State, not Anthony Blinken, had a lawyer present who said, we just asked you to remove the death penalty thing. So all of the sides agreed that was met, but the defense argued that the First Amendment and nationality discrimination assurances were not met. They argued that saying he can seek to rely on the First Amendment does not mean he can rely on it. They also noted that Gordon Kronberg never promised to not raise that argument that there was no First Amendment protections for Assange as a foreign national. And they argued that even if Kronberg did not raise that argument, a court could still independently come to that conclusion. They had their own expert who made those points. And then on the foreign national issue, the United States government put up this preposterous it was the UK government representing my government, put up this preposterous defense that there's a difference between citizenship and nationality. Yes, I know that's true. Thank you very much. And that Assange would not be discriminated against as a foreign national, but as a matter of law, he's a foreigner. Right? At one point, they literally said this isn't Assange being discriminated against because of his nationality. It's just a matter of law. He's a foreigner on foreign soil. Of course, if he's a foreigner on foreign soil, why are we extraterritorially applying the Espionage Act to him? That's a good question to me. But whenever you're saying we're not discriminating because of his nationality, we're discriminating because he's a foreigner, I think you've sort of lost the argument. And the defense argued that these types of arguments were new. They had not been made at previous stages, and that there should be a hearing on them. The judges adjourned for Stella talked about this during the press conference, for what was supposed to be the press conference, or not for the press conference, to come back and tell us where we're at, which caused quite a lot of humor in the press room when people were answering. We know where we're at. We're at the Royal Court of Justice, because no one knew what this meant. Like, we'll come back in 10 minutes and tell you where we're at. Like, we're on planet Earth. We're in the Milky Way. We're in London. What does that mean? And at some point, one of the journalists in the press room said out loud, "It's been 20 minutes. They're making a decision." And when they first went away, there was a big not a debate, a discussion back and forth of those of us in the press room about whether or not this meant they were making a decision, or whether they would just come back and say, we want to hear more facts, or, why don't we have lunch? But after we hit the 20-minute mark, it was clear that they were going to make a decision. And I'll be very honest, I was pacing because I was not expecting this outcome today. Given the degree of, in the March decision, just sort of the degree of negative things for Assange's case, including that bizarre Article 10 analysis, separate from the Gordon Kronberg issue, where they stated only 3 of the charges pertained to freedom of expression, and those publications had no public interest, including when they said Julian Assange's defense can no longer bring up the fact that the CIA tried to kill him because, well, if we send him to the US, they won't try to kill him, right? This was the level of decision. And what I was reading was, they were very much interested in rubber stamping this, and Gordon Kronberg just did such a terrible job. They couldn't, and they were telegraphing with these assurances. And you have to remember, Julian's attorneys to date were fighting with both hands tied behind their back because of all of the limitations that have been placed on them. This extradition should have been squashed 5 years ago under the political offense exception to the treaty, but they've now decided judges can't rule on that in any treaty anywhere. So it's just every single ruling, even when the law is on Julian Assange's side, they rule against him. And on a number of the key issues, the judges have buried their head in the sand. So during that 20, 30 minutes, I really thought they were going to come down and give us the worst possible news. And then they come back and they say, we grant appeal right on leave to appeal on 4 and 5 and denied on this. And everyone's, getting out the list of appeal grounds and trying to figure out what's what.